cold case is an unresolved investigation which remains open pending the discovery of new information.
And investigators are closer than ever to solving this cold case.
Into the nearly decade-old cold case just a few months ago.
OPD's cold case unit has reopened the case.
Murder charges in a 37-year-old cold case. Cold case detectives have reopened this murder mystery.
A cold case of rape. After more than 20 years,
murder may be solved by cold case detectives.
Now that a full-time detective is dedicated to cold cases.
New info in a 25-year-old New Mexico cold case.
A cold case for a 3-year-old girl who vanished back in...
Public perception of the criminal justice system is extensively provoked by media representation. As far as cold cases go, public opinion is really the only verdict presented. As far as solved cases go, there are still multiple media representations and therefore multiple opinions. Although courtroom proceedings may be held privately, media attention may affect the jury's decision elsewhere, but the goal of the justice system is to promote honesty in the presence or lack of evidence. While cold cases depict a lack of substantial evidence to solve a case, many are left to the discretion of media, which affects public opinion. Cold cases have captured the public's attention for many years. Some notable cold cases are the Black Dahlia, the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and Jimmy Hoffa. The Black Dahlia is a famous case that occurred in Los Angeles in the mid-20s involving the murder of a young woman. Her name was Elizabeth Short, and part of the reason for the case's popularity in the public eye is the gruesomeness of the murder and the fact that the killer has never been found. Her body was found cut in half, her face mutilated, she was fully drained of blood, and small pieces of flesh were missing. Very little evidence was left, so the case was unsolved and is the longest open cold case in Los Angeles. Over time, her clothes would appear around town, further fueling the media fire that caused this case to be so well known. Another famous cold case is the Zodiac Killer in San Francisco in 1968. In this case, the killer had multiple victims, a minimum of 5, but he claims up to 37. Along with killing his victims, he would occasionally write coded correspondence to the local media in hopes of getting more attention. It worked, and many attempted to solve his code in hopes of finding the killer's identity. The letters were solved, but they usually contained vague threats that did not lead to significant progress. Although sketches of the killer had been made, this deadly serial killer remains at large. Jack the Ripper is an example of the media's role in criminology. He was supposedly a killer in London during the 1800s. It's speculated that he murdered up to 5 women who were killed in a similar fashion. He was particularly brutal in his dismemberment of his victims, which led the public to believe that he had surgical knowledge. The media played a large role in this, creating fear and making this case one of the first to be reported internationally. The case was never solved, but experts continued to try to piece together the clues. JonBenét Ramsey, a 6-year-old pageant girl from Boulder, Colorado, was murdered Christmas Eve, 1996, in her own home. Early Christmas morning, Patsy Ramsey went to wake JonBenét. Distraught by the sight of her missing and a ransom note, she immediately called the police. The note expressed rules for the security of their daughter, and most notably, a demand for $118,000. The police arrived within minutes and nearly immediately suggested that the parents were guilty for the murder. JonBenét's body was found lying in a small cellar located in the Ramseys' basement. The police found no forced entry into the house at first. It was later discovered that there was a broken window on the ground level of the house. Recently, a more crucial piece of evidence has surfaced. 3 samples of DNA were found at the scene. First, in JonBenét's blood, second, under JonBenét's fingernails, and third, DNA samples that have never been analyzed. The first 2 samples matched, while the third sample was tested 3 years following the murder and finally confirmed to match the other 2 samples. Michael Helgoth was suspected of being an accomplice to the murder after police found the soles of his boots matched the footprints taken inside the Ramsey house. Even though there was evidence for Michael as an accomplice, he committed suicide and no other action was taken against him. It is alleged that another suspect has been identified based on people's encounters, his court history, and ties with Michael, but since the murder he fled and is yet to be found. His name has not been released since no charges have been pressed. There have been other suspects in this case. One man even confessed to killing JonBenét, but his knowledge of the crime did not match that of the crime scene, and he was determined to be lying. While John and Patsy Ramsey were waiting for the promised call in the ransom note, many critical mistakes were made by the police that made closing this case even more difficult. The police did not search the house right away, and JonBenét's body was found by her father sometime after the police arrived. The crime scene was never sealed off, and friends and family were able to come and go at their leisure, so the integrity of the forensic evidence was tainted. The media skewed the public perception by neglecting critical details regarding the case. The house was not completely surrounded by snow, yet media outlets pointed to the lack of footprints in the snow that would surround the house as evidence of the parents' guilt. Also ignored by the media was the facts suggesting forced entry through the basement window, meaning the perpetrator had access to the house. This misstating of facts early in the case further insinuated the parents' guilt. Sadly, the news has become entertainment instead of information, and personal tragedy has degenerated into public speculation. In an interview, John Ramsey said the case has become a trial by media. The evidence implicating the Ramseys was largely based on rumor and speculation, and all physical evidence has failed to prove their guilt. Yet there is still a strongly held belief that they were involved in the murder of their daughter. The city of Boulder in the state of Colorado has spent over $2 million over 3 years investigating the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. This case remains open to this day. Only 20% of agencies have protocols for cold cases. Of those, 1 in 5 cases render a possible suspect, but that doesn't mean an arrest or a conviction is made. 5% of those resulted in arrests, while 1% result in conviction. There are about 6,000 murder cases that go unsolved each year in the United States alone. These cases are sensationalized in part because of general public seeks closure. The media takes advantage of this heightened interest in inconclusive cases and, in turn, glorifies an unrealistic, cinematic perception of crime and criminality.